The first time I saw Lucas, the world seemed to slow down, not in a dramatic movie way, but in that quiet moment when something inside you shifts without warning. I was sitting by the window of a small bookstore cafe, lost between the pages of a novel I wasn't really reading, when he walked in. His presence had a kind of calm confidence that filled the room. The kind you notice not because it's loud, but because it feels steady. He asked if the seat across from me was taken. I said no, not realizing that word would open the door to everything that would follow. Back then, I was 28, an editor for a local magazine in a sleepy coastal town called Maple Bay. My life was structured, predictable even. I liked it that way. I woke early, went for runs along the beach, drank too much coffee, and worked late editing stories about other people's lives. But Lucas, he didn't belong to routine. He was spontaneous, with a voice that carried warmth even when he said the simplest things. He worked as an architect, designing homes that he described as shelters for the soul. I used to tease him for that line, but secretly, I admired the way he believed in beauty and meaning. Our connection was immediate but unspoken. We began meeting often at that same cafe, at first by coincidence, then by choice. The conversations flowed effortlessly: books, music, philosophy, the strange way loneliness can live inside even the happiest moments. Lucas had a talent for making ordinary questions sound profound. He'd look at me across the table and ask, "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something you can't name?" I didn't have an answer, but his eyes made me think maybe he was the thing I'd been waiting for. Weeks turned into months. Our friendship evolved quietly, like a photograph developing in slow motion. Lucas started coming over on weekends. We'd cook dinner together, though he always managed to burn something. He'd laugh it off, saying, "You can't trust me with the stove, but you can trust me with everything else." I believed him. Maybe I wanted to believe him. Love often begins not with certainty, but with a leap of faith. The first time he told me he loved me, it wasn't during some grand moment. We were walking home in the rain, sharing one umbrella that wasn't big enough for two. I was shivering, and he wrapped his arm around me and said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I love you, Ethan." Just that. No hesitation, no build-up. I remember laughing nervously and asking, "Are you sure?" He smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything." That night, I wrote those words in my journal, afraid I might forget how they sounded. I didn't know then that I'd one day remember them for an entirely different reason. For a while, everything felt easy. Lucas and I created our own rhythm: morning coffee, late-night movies, quiet Sundays at home. My friends noticed the change in me. "You seem lighter," one of them said. I was. I felt seen. Understood. Loved. But sometimes, love hides its own shadows. I began noticing small inconsistencies, things that didn't fit the story we were writing together. It started subtly: missed calls, sudden silences when I entered the room. Lucas would smile and say, "Work stress," and I'd accept that. He had projects all over the state, after all. Still, there were moments when his eyes looked distant, as if he were somewhere else entirely. Once, late at night, I woke to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. The glow from the screen lit his face in cold blue light. I asked if everything was okay. He hesitated before replying, "Yeah, just couldn't sleep." He turned off the phone then, but I noticed how tightly he held it, as if afraid it might reveal something he wasn't ready to share. I tried not to dwell on it. Love, I told myself, requires trust. And I did trust him, more than anyone I'd ever known. Yet, a quiet unease began to grow inside me, like a small crack in glass you can't unsee once you've noticed it. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from the balcony, Lucas seemed distant again. The sky was painted with gold and crimson, but he didn't look up once. "You're somewhere else," I said softly. He looked at me, startled, as if caught in a thought he didn't want to explain. "I'm just tired, Ethan," he said after a pause. "Things have been complicated at work." His tone was gentle, but there was something heavy behind it. I wanted to ask more, to press for the truth, but fear held me back. What if I didn't like the answer, so I smiled, pretending everything was fine. That's the thing about love, it teaches you how to lie to yourself beautifully. Despite the growing tension, there were still moments that reminded me why I'd fallen for him. Like the night we drove out to the pier after midnight, just to listen to the waves. He held my hand, thumb tracing small circles against my skin, and whispered, "If I ever hurt you, promise you'll tell me before it's too late." I didn't understand why he said that then. It sounded like a warning, though I brushed it off as sentiment. As months passed, his absences grew longer. Sometimes he'd disappear for entire weekends, saying he had to visit clients in another city. He always came back with the same smile, the same tenderness, but something about him felt altered, like he was returning from a place I couldn't follow. I told myself to stop overthinking. People have secrets, even the ones who love you. And maybe that's okay. But deep down, I knew something was shifting between us, something I couldn't quite name. The last peaceful night we shared came unexpectedly. Lucas had cooked dinner, badly, as usual, and we ended up ordering pizza instead. We sat on the couch, laughing about nothing. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You make me forget who I used to be." I didn't understand the sadness in his eyes when he said it, but I remember wanting to freeze that moment forever. He kissed my forehead, whispering, "I love you, Ethan. Don't ever doubt that." And though I smiled, something about the way he said it felt like a goodbye disguised as love. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. I told myself I was imagining things. That love doesn't unravel this quietly. But as I watched the moonlight slide across his face, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was already slipping away, one secret at a time. What I didn't know then was that the truth wasn't just about another person or another life. It was something deeper, something that would make me question everything I believed about love, honesty, and how well we can ever really know someone. And it all began the moment he said he loved me. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. I would see Daniel outside most evenings, sitting on the porch with a quiet patience, as if waiting for something that no longer existed. I began to find excuses to walk past his house, to check the mail, to water a plant I barely cared for, to pretend I had a reason to be near him. Each time, he looked a little different, sometimes shaven and calm, sometimes lost in thought, and sometimes holding that same half-empty beer bottle, like a habit he couldn't break. One Thursday evening, he called out to me. "Ethan," he said, leaning over the fence, "you're always out here alone. You ever eat dinner with someone, or is solitude your thing too?" I smiled, caught off guard by the sudden familiarity. "Depends who's asking. Someone who's tired of takeout and silence." That was how it began, dinners that felt harmless, ordinary. The first night, we ordered Chinese food and sat in his living room, the air filled with the faint scent of soy and ginger. The space felt strangely hollow, like a house rearranging itself after being emptied. I noticed that the walls were bare where picture frames had once hung. There was a faint tan line where Clara's photos used to be. He caught me looking. "She took the frames, too," he said, without bitterness. "Didn't even leave the nails." We both laughed, but it was a quiet, tired kind of laughter. Our conversations drifted from small talk into something heavier, like water seeping through a crack. Daniel spoke about his marriage the way some people talk about weather, inevitable, unchangeable. "We stopped talking years before we stopped being married," he said. I just didn't notice the silence anymore. I listened, unsure what role I played in his healing, a neighbor, a witness, or something he hadn't named yet. I told him about my own failed relationships, about how I'd learned to fill loneliness with work and distraction. He smiled faintly. "Guess we're both specialists in pretending." The more time we spent together, the more I began to recognize the small details of him, the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was uncertain, the pause he took before admitting anything personal, the low hum he made when he was thinking. There was no clear moment when concern turned into something else, but I started to feel it, a quiet pull I couldn't rationalize. One evening, I found him fixing a loose porch step. He was wearing an old gray t-shirt, the kind softened by years of wear. His forearms were streaked with sawdust. He looked up and grinned. "Want to hand me that screwdriver?" I did, and as our fingers brushed, something unspoken passed between us, fleeting but unmistakable. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then continued working as if nothing had happened. I tried to act natural, but my heart gave itself away. When the step was done, he sat back and sighed. "You ever feel like you're rebuilding something you know will never be the same again?" I nodded. "All the time." He looked at me, eyes catching the fading light. "That's what this house feels like. Every nail I drive in just reminds me of what's missing." That night, the air turned colder. A thin drizzle began, and the smell of wet soil filled the neighborhood. I helped him carry the tools inside. His living room was dim, the light of a single lamp stretching long shadows across the floor. Music played softly from a speaker, something slow and instrumental. "Stay for a bit," he said. "It's miserable out there." We sat on opposite ends of the couch, our conversation wandering. He asked me about my family, my work, my reasons for staying in this town. I answered honestly, though I could feel his attention resting on more than my words. The rain intensified, tapping steadily against the windows. At one point, he leaned back and exhaled. "It's strange," he said. "I spent years trying to be what she wanted, strong, reliable, predictable. But in the end, none of that mattered. She said I'd become a stranger." "Maybe she just stopped seeing you," I said quietly. He turned to me, eyes searching. "Do you?" The question hung between us, heavier than it should have been. I could hear the sound of the rain, the slow rhythm of my heartbeat, and the space between his words. I wanted to look away, but I didn't. "No," I said finally. "I see you." Something shifted in the air then, like the pause before a storm breaks. He didn't speak, but his gaze lingered long enough for meaning to settle. The moment didn't need words, it lived in the silence, in the closeness of two people who had nowhere else to place their loneliness. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the room. We both flinched, half laughing at our reaction, but the tension remained, quiet, fragile, real. He reached for the remote to turn the music down, and his hand brushed my knee. He froze, then pulled back, muttering, "Sorry." "Don't be," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me again, the apology fading from his face, replaced by something else, a kind of recognition neither of us had wanted to admit. The rain outside softened, turning into a steady whisper. We sat there in silence, the distance between us shrinking until it wasn't just physical anymore. I could feel the weight of what wasn't being said pressing into the air around us. I thought about how dangerous it was, not in the obvious sense, but in the quiet, emotional way that leaves marks you can't explain. He was the first to move. Slowly, he stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the dark street. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he said. "Every time I start to feel alive again, it feels like betrayal." "Maybe it's just healing," I said. "They look the same sometimes." He didn't answer, just nodded faintly, his reflection a shadow against the glass. Then he turned back to me. "You should probably head home. It's late." The dismissal was gentle, not cold. I stood, unsure of what to say, feeling the moment slip between us like smoke. As I reached the door, he spoke again, softly, almost as if to himself, "Thank you for staying." I hesitated. "You don't have to thank me." He smiled, small, tired, and real. "I think I do." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of it, damp earth, clean air, a kind of freshness that felt undeserved. I walked the short distance to my house, feeling both lighter and heavier at once. Later that night, lying in bed, I replayed the evening in my mind, every glance, every silence, every word left hanging. There had been no confession, no touch that crossed a line, yet everything in me knew that something irreversible had begun. Through the thin wall, I could hear faint movement again, footsteps, maybe, or a restless soul pacing in the dark. I wondered if Daniel was awake too, haunted by the same questions. Before I fell asleep, one thought settled in me with quiet certainty: whatever we had become, it wasn't just neighbors anymore. And whatever was coming next, neither of us was ready to name it. I didn't quit. I told myself I would, every morning as I buttoned my worn uniform, every night as I wiped down the same tables I'd polished 100 times before. But when Daniel Hayes looked at me, I stayed. It wasn't out of defiance or hope. It was something quieter, something that felt like gravity that in the weeks that followed, the air in the mansion changed. We spoke less in words and more in glances, in silences that carried more meaning than sentences could hold. Daniel grew distant around everyone else. With me, he was careful but warm, as if afraid that one wrong word might shatter the fragile boundary we still pretended existed, Clara noticed. She didn't accuse or raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her eyes did the asking. She'd appear in the doorway whenever we were in the same room, her expression unreadable. Sometimes she'd smile politely and say nothing, which was worse than any confrontation could have been. One afternoon, Daniel asked me to help him carry new architectural models into the study. As I set one down, I noticed his hands trembling. "You're tired," I said quietly. He shook his head. "Just thinking too much." I wanted to leave, to give him space, but he stopped me. "Ethan," he said, his voice almost breaking. "Do you ever feel like every choice you make leads you away from the life you were supposed to have?" I didn't know how to answer. I'd never thought about what I was supposed to have, only what I needed to survive. But his question lingered between us, heavy and real. Before I could respond, Clara's reflection appeared in the glass of the study door. She didn't enter. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke everything. Daniel turned away quickly, pretending to shuffle papers, but his face had gone pale. That evening, Clara asked me to bring her tea. When I handed her the tray, she studied me with unsettling calm. "You're very quiet, Ethan," she said. "That's a good quality. Quiet people notice things others miss." "Yes, ma'am," I said, keeping my eyes down. She smiled faintly. "I hope you're comfortable here." "I am." "Thank you." "Good," she murmured. "My husband has always had a soft spot for people who remind him of his younger self. He trusts easily. I trust, less easily." The words were neither kind nor cruel. They were simply true. I nodded, unsure if she expected a reply. She dismissed me with a graceful flick of her hand, and I left feeling like I'd survived something invisible. The next morning, Daniel didn't come downstairs for breakfast. The house felt colder, emptier. I asked Mrs. Green if he was unwell, but she only gave me a long, knowing look. "Some storms," she said, "don't show until they break." When he finally appeared later that evening, he looked different, tired, defeated. I was cleaning near the staircase when he stopped beside me. "Ethan," he said softly, "I need to speak with you." We went into the garden, where the air smelled of rain and cut grass. The sun was sinking behind the tall hedges, painting everything gold. "Clara knows," he said, his voice low. Or maybe she always did. I felt the ground shift beneath me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never meant to." He raised a hand. "You did nothing wrong. I'm the one who blurred the lines." He paused, searching for the right words. "You've been a reminder of something I'd forgotten, that kindness doesn't always come from equals." The honesty in his tone hurt more than anger would have. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent. "I think you should leave," he said finally. His voice broke on the last word. "Before this turns into something neither of us can undo." I nodded, unable to trust my own voice. It was the only decision that made sense. That night, I packed quietly. I left a note on his desk, short, careful, and true. "Thank you for your kindness. I'm sorry if it caused trouble. You once said stories make us who we are. You'll always be a part of mine." When I stepped outside into the cold dawn, the mansion stood still and silent behind me. I didn't look back. Weeks passed. I found work at a small cleaning company in another town. The pay was worse, but the air felt lighter. I tried not to think of him, but the memory clung to me, the sound of his voice, the weight of the unspoken. Sometimes I'd see a building with glass windows that caught the morning light just right, and it would remind me of his study, of how he'd looked at me like he was trying to remember something lost. Then, one afternoon, he came that I was sweeping the floor of a small cafe when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Ethan." My hands froze. I turned, and there he was, Daniel Hayes, standing by the doorway, looking older somehow. The confidence in his face had softened into something gentler. "I didn't think I'd find you," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd look," I replied. That he smiled faintly. "I had to. I owed you a thank you. And an apology. You don't owe me anything." He stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. "You were right to leave. Clara and we're trying to fix things. It's not easy, but it's real." I nodded. There was nothing else to say. The silence between us felt clean this time, no guilt, no tension, just two people standing at the end of something that had already ended. That he looked around the cafe, then back at me. "You seem happier," he said. "I am," I answered honestly. "I think I finally understand what you meant, that the things we want are sometimes close, but not meant for us to have." He smiled, sadly, but with peace in his eyes. "Take care of yourself, Ethan. You too, Mr. Hayes." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but instead just nodded and walked away. I watched him go until the door closed behind him, and for the first time, I didn't feel the ache of loss. I felt gratitude. As the afternoon sun filtered through the windows, I picked up my broom again. Life had returned to its quiet rhythm, but something inside me had changed. That I wasn't just the cleaning boy anymore. I was someone who had been seen, if only for a brief, impossible moment. And that was enough. Sometimes, when the cafe grew quiet and I caught my reflection in the glass, I'd hear his voice in memory, soft, careful, and distant. "You remind me of someone," he'd said once. Maybe now, when he looked back, he remembered me not as a mistake, but as a reminder, of honesty, of courage, of love that asked for nothing in return. And in the silence that followed, I found peace.